Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Sales. I'm Ashleigh Early.
And I'm Kasey Jones.
And today we are joined by Raul Gutierrez. We're so excited to have Raul with us. He is an inside sales account manager for the Dell Boomi product team. He describes himself as an atypical SaaS salesperson who is all about spreading optimism, knowledge, and love. I love to use the hashtag for the culture, especially because we are so obviously about creating an inclusive B2B sales culture. Any hashtag with culture we are here for. Raul, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for having me. Super grateful to be here. A fun fact, this is actually, even though I've had my own podcast in the past, this is the first time I've ever been on a podcast. So this is nuts. I'm happy to break my teeth with you all. So
Thank you for using that metaphor. I had a different one in my head.
Yes, I know.
That is very exciting. We are honored.
Diving right in, why don't you, for people who aren't familiar with you, obviously you're putting out, I met you actually through your podcast, which was fantastic. And just putting a lot of great content out on LinkedIn last year. But for people who aren't familiar with you, I mean, tell them a little bit about your background. Just even in our pre-call discussions, you were sharing us a little bit about your history. I mean, especially you've lived in a bunch of different places.
Yeah.
Not your classic Florida man, as it were.
No. I ran for the hills, I guess, if you will. But yeah, I was Florida born and raised, really proud Puerto Rican boy, right? I guess if you want to talk about intersections of what makes me atypical, it's that I'm a queer Latino who doesn't know sports in sales. So I feel like those are a lot of intersections, but those
are intersections for
exactly.
Sure.
And I love doesn't know sports. That's great. I love that has to be included.
Yeah, well, I don't know. When everyone's talking about did you see the game? I'm like, the rapper, or I'm just curious, like not really sure what we're talking about. And yeah. So only sport I watch is Drag Race, but that's because it's been on forever.
Finally, another salesperson who's into drag queens. Thank you. We'll deal with that later.
Channel. I'll tell you that. But yeah, so I got my my start. It's actually a little bit weird. I co-founded a small cybersecurity software solution geared towards medical devices in college with a bunch of friends. And what ended up happening was I was working retail management and had all these fancy suits, like fine men's tailoring. The clothing rack is behind there. And yeah, so they wanted me to pitch to these investors, to these potential customers. They say, you've got the look, you can schmooze. And I was like, all right, perfect, I'll do it. And so that's where I kind of started with sales, right? And then that developed to, hey, I can make technology sales a career. Found the biggest, baddest company that would take me. Took me to New Relic, which is like a monitoring company based out of the San Francisco. Really neat, really cool perspective. But I started, I'll be honest, at the bottom, SDR, right? You go from being your own boss, being in charge of a bunch of books, and they're like, you're fantastic. Start at the bottom, which is fine because I like to think I'm not too good for any job. And it was a humbling perspective to start at the bottom, right? And then from there, went to another big tech company, PagerDuty, in the IT operations space. And that was really neat. And then I realized I kind of like startups. Went to a small logging startup based out of Tel Aviv that was debuting in the US. And that was last year. They debuted, in March of 2020. So you can imagine the uphill battle that was delivering a new software that came free of Corona. And then now, I got picked by Dell Boomi to work on this really interesting kind of what I can only describe as like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen type team, because it's inside sales, but it's trial success and it's product-led growth. And we're doing things that are very atypical, which coincidence, atypical in a sales motion, but really helps me kind of understand how I view the future of sales. Because I've been, butts in seats, cold call, dial, and email. But yeah, so I think that's pretty much where my career has gone, and I'm pretty happy with it. I'm pretty happy with it. Always willing to learn and see more, though. For sure.
Yeah, it sounds like a very interesting career, and one that I think we've talked to a lot of people that have kind of a similar story, myself included, where it's you are closing deals, doing a lot more, and then when you start in tech, it's what I refer to as taking a small step back to take a giant leap forward, right? And so having to kind of start at the beginning and kind of cut your teeth at doing prospecting, which don't know that I know that there are some people that are just like lifelong SDRs. Yeah. Most of us kind of hate prospecting. It's a grind and it's brutal. And but it's an amazing, amazing experience. And I think teaches you so much about kind of how different SaaS sales is from every other kind of sales experience. So I'm curious, okay, you are atypical in a lot of different ways. And we were talking before we kind of hopped on that you check off a lot of the boxes of what makes someone kind of an underrepresented sales professional. Attitude, demographics, experience, you name it. And so you have this really like interesting perspective. And given everything that has happened in the last year, and I think we've seen just a lot more conversation around what it means to be an underrepresented kind of professional. We're having a lot more both frank and kind of bullshit conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like, what's your perspective on this? Like, when you hear, I mean, what have you seen from your perspective as a queer Puerto Rican man? What have you seen in terms of companies starting to kind of talk about these issues? Companies sometimes walking the walk, sometimes not. Kind of what's your take? What does it feel like?
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to unpack the fact that there's a genuinely large movement that's advocating for my demographic, which I forgot to also add neurodivergent as well. So just, you can put a gold star there too, because I'm a big
adding to that list. Like,
yeah. And it's crazy because it's how I walk into the room, because I like to let people know that, you know, when you see me, I look like a white passing, you know, average, oh, there's such and such, you know, he's cool. But I lead with my struggles because it's what I have to fight before I walk into the door, right? So I acknowledge there's this giant movement, but I've had no choice but to fight and exist. You know, I can't wake up and say, well, the world doesn't accept me and want me to win, so I'm going to go back to bed, and hopefully tomorrow when I wake up, they'll say, hey, you know what, Raul, now's your time. But unfortunately, after 27 years, that's never happened. So I've always been fighting the good fight for my people and people unlike me, because anyone who's worked with me and gotten to know me personally in any capacity, or even just a simple conversation, knows I'm a huge fan of the underdog story. Whatever the marginalized person is, whatever the unlikely candidate is, that's the person I'm relating with, because I see that in myself each and every day. So while I am extremely grateful that these conversations are happening, I acknowledge that it's not necessarily my time to have them, because I've been having them my whole life. I let people educate and speak out themselves if it's their struggle, their strife. And I'm really happy to see it. And I'm obviously a huge proponent for inclusion in every way, but also just have the dialogues. Like, you know, there's nothing bad with saying like, oh yeah, Raul, he's a queer Puerto Rican guy. People are like, you can't say that, that's bad. And it's like, baby, he came in here with a rainbow bandana and skinny jeans with his shirt all open. Like, he came in here with boisterous personality. You can't discredit that. And, you know, I'm cool with it. And I think people are starting to get okay with it too. You know, when you say, hey, I see that, it's a talking point. It's another conversation, one that should be had, but important.
And honestly, it's from my perspective, it's when we talk about things, when we speak very frankly and openly about things that make us nervous, it kind of sucks the energy out of the idea that it should make us nervous or that it should make us uncomfortable, right? And so it's like, if you can just kind of call it out and obviously in a respectful and kind and loving way, that's the stuff that brings us together. It's when we're sort of afraid to speak frankly about one another's experience that it becomes easy to, I don't know, put up walls in between us and us to, it makes it harder for us to actually connect and bond. So I'm curious, because I think, you know, that's super helpful in terms of understanding kind of how you walk through the world and what that experience is like for you. How are you feeling about the way kind of companies, what is the role from kind of a corporate and company perspective in terms of either improving the state of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or coming up short? Have you seen anything, or had any experiences that, I don't know, have either been particularly good or particularly not?
Yeah. Well, you propose a question that I have asked myself every time I chose to tackle on a new venture, right? Or take on a new adventure.
Yeah.
And it's saying like, who's going to have my best interest? Is it big old company with all the means and all the marketing and all the press? Is it the small company that's like, it's 7 of us, but we're like brother and sister? And I got this bubble bursted early in the game. It was, you don't know until you're in there, because the vision you get sold is, no one says, oh, we're going to bring you on and we're going to abuse you and you're not going to feel welcome, but you're going to do the best work ever. You're going to make a ton of money. I wish it was that, because then I'd at least say, well, you better rely on that money and it better be good, because if you're going to be treated like garbage. But I've seen companies that paint themselves as super inclusive and have all this space that essentially only create a microcosm for people of color and marginalized people to exist in, but they don't necessarily become agents of change because they exist in this small bubble. They say, well, look at your little ideas and your ERGs and your marches and funds and little activities with movies and things like that. That's great. And then you're like, well, let's take it to the greater organization. Like, whoa. You get your 30 minutes, you get your TED Talk, that's it. And then I've seen small companies that are like, no, we're all about the culture. And there's literally no culture there. And what I say that it is like, there's no human spirit. You kind of get caught into the actions of doing. And I'm very big on intent and the purpose, because I like to think I could do any job. But if my heart and soul's is not in it, it's not going to be it's not going to be good, So I guess to answer your question, I know that there's people who are serious about the being change makers and wanting to create, but I'd say I'd be more honest about the shortcomings and saying, hey, we didn't do this, or we don't have this, or we thought we did this and we couldn't do this, than selling me a dream, because I've been sold dreams my whole life and I don't have one in my closet at this point. You know what I mean? But yeah, so I just think, and I don't think it's a pessimistic perspective. It's just saying you don't know until you're in there. But once you do know, be vocal about it and stand up for what's right, because you should never bend your morals or your compass just to, or give yourself a gag order because you think it's the right thing. Being vocal and calling things out is kind of how we avoid situations getting, I guess, too bad, if you will. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
No, you're spot on. I think you make an interesting point there too, around the, kind of, you never know until you're in there. And that's what I think would have been one of the hardest things, especially now in 2020, when there was so much discussion around DEI that is questionably or arguably performative. If you're looking at joining a company like millions of people are right now, you've been on the hunt for a while, you've finally got a company that's looking like they're kind of interested in you, and you're asking, should I be interested in them? How do you figure out if that's the safe place or not? And the short answer is, you're right, you can't know. You never know until you're in there. But what you can figure out is whether or not that internal compass, those ethics, align with at least the person who you're going to be directly reporting to.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting conversation to have. And it's a scary one to have the first time. And then I feel like it becomes a little bit more table stakes after you've, kind of sussed it out a little bit. But I guess I'm curious at this point. How do you tell if your compass is aligning with the people at the company you're about to join?
Yeah. I think the wrong answer is 100% gut, but I like to think I have a good internal compass, but I let my comfort decide. If I get off of a conversation when I was interviewing and whatnot, if I get off a conversation and I don't genuinely feel good and my stomach feels a little empty and my heart's a little quivery and my hands are a little shaky, I'd assume those things are going to be grouped in with a negative experience or not so great conversation or something that was unaddressed. And that's me. That's how I operate. But now when we think about actual procedures that would work on a more universal level, because we don't have what I would call a bullshit detector. When someone says like, you're going to make $100 million your first year, I wish I could just put that detector right up to the thing and be like, all right, say it again. But what I do say is And one practice that I think all people could do in an interview cycle is leading with the ugly. It's what I did with my most recent job, and they were 100% right about what the ugly is, right? It was the workload and the process isn't cemented, but we're working on it and it's going great. But what happens is when you lead with the ugly and say, all right, you're looking to fulfill this role because there's obviously a need. What is that? And what are the greatest hurdles that someone in this position is going to take on? Because I want to make sure that I'm capable of dealing with what the worst part of this job is. Right? Is it excessive hours? Is it, you don't have the bandwidth? Is it that there's no concrete solution in place? Is it that the objectives aren't aligning with the performance? Right? Tell me what it is getting people, that's stopping people from getting to that finish line. And then I'll let you know if that's something that I can excel in, can understand, agree upon, and work with you on. Right? And I think if I asked myself that every time and I got an honest answer every time, my resume probably would have looked a little different. But I think it's okay to lead with the ugly. We think about the age-old analogy of like sales and dating, but this is more like applying for jobs and dating. And I like even that same perspective is lead with what you got, your baggage, your non-negotiables. What the worst thing is like, you know what? That's what I got. Does it work for you? Yes? Great. Let's talk about it. Doesn't work for you? All right. You know what? That doesn't make you less of an awesome person. Let's just keep it moving,
Well, I think this is an amazing, amazing strategy. Like, I think this is brilliant. And I wish it's something that we learned more, particularly when we're young, because oftentimes you're so worried about impressing them. You're so worried about what they're going to think of you that you kind of forget that you have the same right to know what you think of them. And we're not good at asking that. But I think that's just a brilliant way of doing it, of really asking, okay, what is going to be the biggest challenge that someone stepping into this role is going to face? And like, what do you think are the kind of skills or the characteristics that's going to make someone successful in that? Because I gotta be honest, no, we don't have an actual bullshit detector, but I feel like their answer to that question will be the easiest way to be able to tell if they're being real or not. Because if you get like a canned answer that basically avoids the question,
we need a team player. You're like, because you're gonna abuse them.
We need someone who can manage all of the inbound leads we're giving to you because you're gonna get so many of them. That's usually when you're like, okay, sure, and like I think it's true culture-wise. I think no matter what company you're applying for, you are oftentimes going to get sold a bill of goods. But I think sales professionals get it way more than anyone else because you get told, I mean, how many times have we been told by a potential employer that 90% of the team is hitting quota? And then you get it and you're like, or that everybody's getting tons of inbound leads, or like you name it. Like we have all been sold that bill of goods a million times.
You're in a struggle with time management and making sure you can balance the research. It's like,
it's just not going to work. Like I think, and part of the interruption, Ashleigh, I think it's also prevents you from being anxious, because when things are too good, and maybe it's just I've had a bad upbringing or some childhood trauma, but when things are too good, that weighs on you. And you're like, what is the bad thing? You know what I mean?
The other shoe gonna drop. Without a doubt. Yeah.
So if I go in there and I'm like, I know what shoe dropped and the other shoe when it's gonna drop, then it's like, oh, well, I guess I could just focus at the work at hand.
I'm so glad I'm not the only person who is actually more stressed when things are going really well than I am when things are going really bad. Because when things are going bad, I know what I need to do and I can go do it. And I'm like forced to focus. When things are really good, it's like, where am I gonna get hit? Something's gonna break. Where is it coming from? Yeah, exactly. You're like ducking and weaving. But the thing we've got here is this is all about kind of a job perspective, and we know interviews are suspect. We all know this. Something I think we haven't talked about is, and Kasey, you're so right. I wish someone had told me this 10 years ago. Oh dear Lord, this would have saved me a lot of heartache. But kind of the other side of that is, this is why we need to do our own backdoor checks in the companies we're looking at joining. You need to talk to people who work at the company, as long as there are people outside the interview process. If you're talking to a 7-person company, you can't do this. You're talking to a 500-person company, you can. Reach out, ask these questions to somebody who's not in the interview process. Be blunt. What's going on? How many are really hitting quota? Can you can you check on this for me? What's the manager like? Trust but verify all of these things. It should not be hard to do. I don't know about you guys, but every time a sales rep has reached out to me and asked for information, and this is me, I'm like you, Raul, I lead with the ugly, and I'm very direct about it.
Yeah.
I actually do it in interviews specifically. I tell people, I'm going to try and scare you off. And if you still want this job, we'll talk. Because I don't want anyone coming in here thinking it's going to be a cakewalk, because it ain't.
Yeah.
But anytime somebody reaches out to me, they're going to get the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's like a salesperson code. Like if somebody reached out to me and is like, hey, I was told that 80% of the team hits quota every month. I'm like, probably closer to 70. I mean, it's not bad, but there are things that can happen that can screw with you. There's a lot to be said for going through that back door. And I think and I'm curious what you two think. I wonder if you think there is kind of a sales code. Like it would never occur to me to lie to somebody or to sugarcoat things when somebody's reaching out to do that sort of a backdoor check.
Yeah. I don't know. No, I don't think people actively lie, but I think depending upon who you're reaching out to, they might also still be under the kind of spell of the kind of corporate line. And I would say if you're an SDR who's applying, you're a lot more likely to find SDRs who still totally believe what their managers and their leadership are telling them about career development and opportunity and all these other things. And so that doesn't mean that they're going to lie to you, but it doesn't necessarily mean they have the whole story either.
Well, maybe this comes back to, Raul, what you were saying with like the dual perspectives, because same thing goes for getting an SDR who just left the company and asking what they think about what just happened. They're probably a little bit bitter about how things ended up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's, so you hit my favorite subject is the duality aspect, right? So even in a situation where you're thinking, all right, let's give us a hypothetical scenario. Someone reaches out to me about a company I used to work at. Right. And they'd be like, oh, you went there. You didn't work there anymore, or you don't work there anymore. How was it? Is it good for me? Should I apply? Can you get me in the door? I'm naturally, like I said, using the same narrative. I lead with the ugly and say, hey, look, it was a great job and I met cool people, but these are the things that I hated. These are the things that were terrible. I couldn't stand this. This was not okay. And this was the reason I left. Those were awful things and negative experiences for me. Flip that, the dual side, those may be amazing things that they're looking for. They're like, oh, I know it may seem crazy, but it's like the concept of someone's trash is another man's treasure. It's the same thing. It's like, wait, I've been looking for a challenge. I hate the same rigmarole of every day. I don't like these organized teams. I like an expansive schedule where I'm not working 8 to 5 behind a computer. And I'm fine with the team not expanding and not having the bandwidth because it gives me more work to do. So I feel accomplished and responsible. And then I'd say, wow, you're crazy. But then I'd say, well, hey, if you took from what I said that, bravo, good on you,
But I think this touches on a really, really important part. How do you figure out what environment works for you? And especially when you're early in your career, because I think oftentimes it takes us like a couple of different types of jobs before we realize like, oh, I actually do really well when they don't give me process because I love developing the process on my own. Like, how has that worked for you? And as your career has evolved, for you to be able to figure out what kind of environment and what sorts of conditions help you thrive? Like, how did you do that? Because I think that's a really tough process and like journey to go through in your early career.
Well, I guess I'd say, how do I frame this? I'm thinking, I guess how I came about it was my work appetite mimics my actual hunger. And it's that I will try anything until it physically hurts me. Right? I know that sounds crazy, but like I'll literally eat anything. I don't read the ingredients on sushi because I go purely based off name. I don't look at what things are in cocktails purely based off name. And I also do the same with entrees. Anyways, this isn't about what Raul puts in his body to eat, but what it says is like, I just put myself in, I didn't marry an idea of what a perfect work scenario was, because as I got older and what is it? I'm 27 now. I stopped the narrative of a dream job, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, because I was like, I'm not married to the idea of working. So no company, no job would achieve a dream for me. I could achieve a feeling. I could have an ideal work scenario. I could have a couple characteristics that I've known over the years to make me feel really comfortable and productive, like a standing desk, a happy hour, all you can drink beer at the tap. You know what I mean? Like those are things that I've known to make me feel really good and productive. But that came with time. And also what people have to understand is you have to be introspective. You have to take something you're experiencing, understand what it is, how it looks, how you interpret it, and how it makes you feel, right? If I touch a fire, I say, oh, fire, pretty cute. Touch it, it burns. And I'm saying, oh, this made me feel bad. Now I've learned this new kind of emotional connection that if I touch fire, it hurts. What do I not want? More fire. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But so many people are they feel obligated. They wake up, and this is another one of these kind of mantras I have is you have to ask yourself every day why you do it. Because if you wake up one day and you start doing something and you're like, well, I have to get this done, you've immediately lost credibility, because an obligation is not a real thing, right? You may feel obligated, but that's a feeling of self. You're not forced to do anything in this world. You don't have to pay rent. You don't have to be a good kid. You don't have to make a quota if you're a salesperson. You don't have to make millions of calls if you're an SDR. All of those feel like obligations, and they may go in line with what job requirements are, but there's nothing you have to do. You can always just tap out and leave and find somewhere happier for you. But if you're not having that dialogue of how it makes you feel, I don't know what to tell you, Slim. You got to have that talk with yourself.
No, I think that's a really important point too, because maybe you're lucky and you're one of those weird people who are actually very self-aware at 21. Bless your heart. I was not, trying to figure this stuff out. And you're very self-aware and you're like, okay, I know, like, I think of like when I was looking at colleges, I don't know why, but I knew at 17 or whatever that I wanted to go to a school where I could interact with my professors. So I knew I wanted a smaller private school, and, student loans be damned. A few years on, different thoughts about that. But I knew that because I knew that's how I worked. I knew that's how I learned. I loved debating my teachers. I loved pissing them off. It was my favorite stuff in school. So I went and I found a school that did that. So I think there's a similar sort of thing there around, like, if you can try and get a little bit self-aware and figure out what sort of environments you thrive in outside of sales, it's probably similar to the sort of companies you'll look for. But the other side of it is you got to just dive in and do it and be self-aware about, with each experience, what do I like? What do I not like? Yeah. Like, I don't know if either of you have ever done this, but I recommend it to a lot of people when they come to me and they're looking for jobs. I say, make a list of pros and cons for the last job you had, the thing, like literally like everything you did in a day, and put it in either the pro column or the con column, and then write out a pro and con column for what you want to do. Yeah. And kind of go from there, and you figure things out. But I think the other thing is, and I think the three of us are pretty good examples of this, that those asks, those environments where you thrive can change every 5 minutes. True. 3 years ago, you would not have caught me dead running my own company, working remote 100% of the time. I was adamant that I do best in an office. I love running a team. This is what I want to do. This is great. And then life changed and I changed. And you know what? This is great. I like this just as much. It's fine. Your environment can change just as quick. Like you said, I don't know if I go so far as there are no obligations, but you're right. Like, I get it. Like, nothing is forced in this world. There's no job that's worth being miserable every day. There's no amount of money that is worth being miserable every day.
I think the point though is that obligations are a choice. Yeah. Right. Yes, you might have obligations based on things that you've kind of chosen, and the vision that you have, the goals that you have. But when it really comes down to it, it's choice, right? And I think this is something that it is really tough early on in your career, and in life in general, right? Because we're still figuring out who the hell we are and a lot of the early direction we have is things that we feel like we are supposed to do. Yeah. And it's only doing them that teaches us like, A, I really hate this thing I'm supposed to do. And B, maybe I don't have to do it.
Yeah.
And there's something amazing about having that aha.
And when you're like, wait a second, I'm done. And it's like that aha moment of the dude at the cubicle who's like, I'm it, it's over. And then they're all like, oh, he lost his mind.
Yeah, but it is, I mean, I think it is always really helpful for those of us that have made the kind of weird career changes, or especially this whole like taking a step back just to take a step forward. It starts to help you realize that, like, I don't know, you've got more options ahead of you. And so I'm curious, with all of the things that you've already done and all of the things that you are kind of doing and learning in your atypical style, what do you think is like the future for you when you think about, okay, where do you want to be? What is the next like evolution of your career? What do you think about? What do you kind of, I don't know, envision?
Yeah. Well, I'm still in the early phases of my life dream. I've been writing it for about 27 years, and unfortunately I'm not completed. But that's also because I'm a terrible writer. But what I see now is my life and my goals in short-term sprints. And I've done this because, one, I get really anxious when I have long-term goals over a really long time, because I feel like I'm never going to reach them and there's no progress. So I give myself weekly objectives that I know contribute to a greater picture, but and I chip away at them. Now, what they look like for me is, one of the things that I'm very adamant about is, and I'll give you kind of like the street term is, put my friends on game. So what that means for me is handing off the knowledge that either I gained access to, that I was willingly or voluntarily handed or earned, and giving those to the people who could, one, use them, two, could benefit them, and three, seek to implement it, right? So yeah, like, I guess, you know, I got pulled for thoughts on this like clothing brand that's popping up. I'm I guess creatively directing this small cosmetics and skincare line that my friend's doing, and it's because people see my intellect and my experience as something valuable. So I'm, one, humbled by that anyone thinks I'm smart and useful. I always think those are nice feelings that make me feel good. But I want to say, hey, all right, look, I'm not a gatekeeper. This is yours. Obviously, you know, some stuff comes with a price, but I'm saying, what's the point? Like, if you can benefit from it, let me hand that off. That's okay. So there's one of my goals, is helping other people achieve their dream. And the other thing is seeking fulfillment in myself. Like, that's the goal I have every week, is one professional goal, one personal goal, and just something else, because I like it in threes. So so I find one thing that I can achieve at work, one thing that'll give me personal fulfillment. They might be in line, they might not, that's all right. And then something, you know, like I said, extra, just because I like to push myself to the limit. What is advice that you wind up giving to other people most often? Start. Literally start. I don't care what it looks like. It could be rinky-dink, it could be poor quality, it could be half-assed, it could be whatever, but you have to start. I suffer from a thing that I call just, I guess, terminal procrastination. And I have all these beautiful visions of all these amazing things. And I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. This is what's going to look like. People are going to rant and rave. They're going to write about me in books and have me in museums. But those ideas never actually leave my brain or even become tangible. So when people come to me, they're like, I want to start this, I said, okay, we'll do it. I'm like, well, you know, money is not a limiting factor. It is a factor, but it's not a limiting factor. There's a ton of workarounds you can do. I mean, I grew up lower middle income, like family bracket, and graduated debt free. How did I do it? I busted my ass, but there was a workaround. You know what I mean? Yeah. So when I tell people, is like, they come to me because they see that I'm a person with vision and who can make them tangible. And I pride myself in that trait. But it's only because I started and I tried to do something, and I started putting those words on paper and those ideas and materializing them and let them grow, and obviously water them too. It's like a plant. But yeah, that's definitely my one nugget of knowledge I pretty much hand off to everybody. It's like, how do I start? You begin.
All right. We're getting to our end of our time, and that means it's time for the lightning round. So these are a series of questions designed just to be fun, lighthearted, don't think too much about it. And we'll start with, what's your morning routine?
That's easy. I make my Bustelo coffee in my greca, which I believe translates into English a percolator, the little metal pots. I play the playlist of choice, which changes every day, tends to lean more towards lo-fi hip hop, and a Spotify playlist called Workout Twerkout. So those are my jams to get started. And then I groom myself for probably about an hour and a half every day, like, between exfoliating, skincare, and all that stuff. But yeah, that's my morning routine, if you believe that.
Sounds pretty fabulous. Good way to start the day. So name one person who's had a significant impact on your sales career.
Ooh, I would say my first boss at New Relic, his name's Terry Bradley. He's the guy who gave me a chance in SaaS sales and said, I see something in you and I'm going to make it happen. And I cried after we had our first interview, and I just always, we don't keep in touch too much because he's a busy guy, but it's just that one chance. It was what led me to a moment like this. So I'm eternally grateful for all those free games, if you will, that I got. But shout out to Terry Bradley. He's an amazing guy. Amazing.
I love those. Everybody's got that one person who gave them a shot. It's fantastic. And that's something that never goes away. So, all right. And then we heard about the Workout Twerkout playlist. Mm-hmm. What's your pump up song?
Pump up song. So it's funny. I don't even know if people really know it like that, but "Steal My Sunshine" by Len is I know it's to be if you steal my sunshine. Yes, between that and How Bizarre. I don't know. It's just something about those two songs are so funky, and I'm like, you're weird. Own it, live it, love it, learn it, acquire tenure in it, retire, and then do it on your free time voluntarily.
Oh my God, acquire tenure.
Both were such total babies when those songs came out, but those were like anthems when I was in high school. So
yeah, still bops. Yeah, that's the power of music, right?
love it. I have been loving all the plays on the How Bizarre on TikTok. It's pretty hilarious. Okay, so what's one thing you wish you'd learned earlier?
No one's going to help you. I know that seems a little dark, but I always found myself let down by people, or that people weren't there for me. Despite I pride myself in pretty much always being available to those I care about and really helping out and being kind of the bridge that gets people to a good place, right? Whether that means self-sacrifice or a bunch of different ways. But I guess I just had to learn early on, and I wish I would have taught myself this lesson, is that no one's obligated to help you. You have to put yourself on. You have to have your own back. And I guess the accompanying phrase was, I've never seen a two-seater coffin. And I guess I taught myself that in when I was a teenager, but I wish I just would have known that you can't rely on people. And I know that sounds kind of pessimistic, but that's positive, because the person you can rely on is you, the person in the mirror. So start there and make sure they got you. Because if they don't, they're probably not one else. So.
Not that dark. All right. What's your favorite sales book?
So I know it sounds really bad, but I tell people I didn't learn how to read until last year. I did know how to read. I just actively didn't read. But I guess my number one sales book is actually not a sales book. It's like a self-development book that I recently picked up maybe like 3-4 months ago, by the title Get Ish Done by Ish Verduzco. He's a Latino author for this self-development book, which I think there's only like 2 maybe self-development books written by Latino authors. So I had to pick this one up. And it just really helped me sculpt my dreams, my goals, tailor down how I communicate with people, and also speak to myself. Like, there's a lot of self-care in there. And that's like one of my big things. So it wasn't traditional how to sell. It wasn't like Zimmerman, like, you'll love it, I guarantee it. But to me, it taught me how to sell well, because I was selling my own dreams to myself. I was selling this vision of what I could be to other people. And I think that book really helped me. So shout out to Ish.
That's awesome. That I'm adding that to my list.
Which means it'll be read by next month.
Boom. Love it. Action Jackson.
What's one way someone could have been a better ally to you?
I'd say own up to it. Own up to your shortcomings. I mean, there's times where I personally couldn't have been a better ally to other people. And I think those instances where I just needed to own up, where I was a shitty person, I was uneducated, I misspoke, and just put your cards out on the table. I wish the people who want to come and support, obviously, my cause or my intersectionality or all these things, just, it's okay to not always be that, but that allows us to acknowledge why this monumental change of, hey, I do want to help now, and I do want to educate, and I do want to learn. But I think that's the best way people, for me, that I've seen is, no, just own up to your shortcomings. I love that, because now, once again, we start with the ugly, and now we know where we're going from. So,
yeah.
And I think you just answered this one. What's one way you're working on being a better ally to others?
Well, actually, I think I'd suggest it's different. It's New York in the back. I don't know if you knew that. Is shut up. I get such in a habit of trying to relate and tell people that I have experience with either their trauma or their specific situation that they bring to me. And I want to relate. I want to unpack. I want to give suggestions. I want to give tips. I want to give plans. And then I realize, why am I talking so much about someone else's issue? I can't get involved. You need to shut up, remove your hands from the situation. And yes, you can give tutelage and knowledge and advice, but you have to hear them first. You have to see how it plays out. And then you can get involved if they're obviously consenting and want you to help. But I really do sometimes, like when people bring me problems, I'll go on a whole monologue and I think I'm just like, go ahead.
I love that. I think that's a very, very good one. Okay, last but not least, what's your guilty pleasure after a bad day?
I just started playing Fortnite, and yeah, I play literally no more than 2 rounds a day, because I know it will get worse, but every day after I'm like stressed, I literally go in there. I'm not great at it, but it really helps me work things out and yell at digital people. So
It's
really
awesome.
grateful for that.
Get that energy out of there.
Right? So
yep.
No, it's cool. I love it.
All right, Raul, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a blast. How can people connect with you? Where can they find you online?
Oh, yeah. So, I'm Raul Ricardo Gutierrez over on LinkedIn. I'm actually bringing out new content coming soon. I used to do Flex Thursday live series. Those are coming back. So this is my way of telling you Raul's going to be back on LinkedIn. That's a promise I made to myself and a promise I made to the world. And then also social handles. I'm on Instagram. Flex Thursday is actually now there. It lives on IG Reels. So rg.collectible. You'll see some of my content there. Weekly self-care videos about showing love to yourself. And once again, going back to that, spreading optimism, positivity, and self-love, because it's what for the culture, baby. All right. So yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a blast. And thank you all, dear listeners, for listening to yet another episode of The Other Side of Sales. Please, if you've enjoyed this, make sure to jump onto your podcast catcher of choice. Please leave us a review, give us a rating, share the show with somebody else that you love, or give a tag Raul or us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, or whatever your social platform is of choice. Feel free to keep this conversation going. And with that, we'll see you next time.
Thanks,
awesome.
y'all.
Thank you.